I want to go through something that I just thought was the most insane article I've ever read from the New York Times. Even more ridiculous than the Russia fear-mongering against Bernie Sanders. Some of it is valid, but a lot of it was just complete bullshit. How it all came apart for Bernie Sanders. You know, because the blame game begins. And by the way, I don't think Bernie Sanders is going to win, but I also don't think it's over until he suspends his campaign. It ain't over. And I think Bernie Sanders is making a major mistake not going live every single day and not basically asking, where is the leadership from President Trump and where is the leadership from Joe Biden? So let's look at this, and I want to give you my thoughts, and I'll have Jen get in here too. In mid-January, a few weeks after the Iowa caucus, Senator Bernie Sanders' pollster offered a stark prognosis for the campaign. Mr. Sanders was on track to finish strong in the first 3 nominating states, but Biden's powerful support from older African Americans could make him a resilient foe in South Carolina and beyond. The pollster, Ben Tolchin, in a meeting with campaign heads, recommended a new offensive to influence older black voters, according to three people briefed on his presentation. The data showed 2 clear vulnerabilities for Biden: his past support for overhauling Social Security and his authorship of a punitive criminal justice law in the 90s. But the suggestion was met with resistance. Some senior advisors argued that it wasn't worth diverting resources from Iowa and New Hampshire, people familiar with the campaign deliberations said. Others pressed Mr. Tolchin on what kind of message exactly would make voters rethink their support for the most loyal ally of the first black president. Crucially, and this right here is the most important thing, Bernie and his wife Jane consistently expressed reservations about going negative on Biden, preferring to stick with the left-wing policy message they have been pressing for 40 years. Right there, to me, and there's a lot of other reasons about how it came apart, right there was the main reason. I think the media was about 60% of it, and I think 40% of it was Bernie Sanders himself. The bottom line is Bernie Sanders, and this began in 2016 and continued now, Bernie Sanders decided he's going to launch a revolution, but he's never going to throw any punches at his opponents. Barely threw any punches against Hillary Clinton. And honestly, the biggest punch he threw was in the last debate against Joe Biden, where he, to me, kind of passively aggressive, was like, wait a minute, Joe, you didn't stand on the Senate floor and call for cuts to Social Security? It was never direct. It was never assertive. It was never, frankly, just going for the jugular. And frankly, say what you want about Donald Trump. I wouldn't suggest you borrow any traits from him. But a big reason he won in 2016 is he just didn't give a f***. He called them all corrupt. He named names. He called them puppets. And people responded to that. And frankly, this argument that, well, Democratic voters are different, they wouldn't like that. No, I don't think they are. I think people like a fighter. I think people like somebody willing to call it out. I think people, if you're going to ask people to get on this train with you for a radical change, you need to explain to them why this person is a threat. Not just read to me very academically about their votes, but why this person voted for those things, why they are corrupt. I think one of the turning points was Bernie's surrogate, Zephyr Teachout, wrote a piece in The Guardian calling Joe Biden corrupt. Bernie Sanders immediately clammed up and went on TV and said, or made a statement basically denouncing his own surrogate and saying, I don't think Joe Biden's corrupt. Well, you're doing the Biden's campaigns, work for them. Bernie Sanders was never going to be the person willing to lead a hostile takeover of the Democratic Party. It's not the only reason he is not winning. It's not the only reason he's probably going to lose, but it's a big part of it. It's a big part of it. Bernie Sanders was just never willing to do what needed to be done. I don't think it's the only reason he lost, because what he was doing, we all are experts after the fact, but not a lot of people were criticizing Bernie when he was on 60 Minutes as the front runner like 30 days ago. Remember how quickly this all turned. Everybody was saying, oh, Bernie's doing the right thing, his campaign's doing the right thing, their organizing efforts are doing the right thing. He won Iowa, he won New Hampshire, he clobbered the competition in Nevada, he's got the wind behind his sails. So not everybody was playing armchair quarterback when Bernie was doing very well. But the problem is Bernie has what I think is a very admirable idea about politics. We're going to win on the issues, but also a highly naive idea about politics. You don't win in politics just based on the issues. If the American people were informed by the media, maybe you could win just on the issues. But because the American people are not informed, that's why we need a status coup in America. So Bernie and Jane basically never allowed the campaign to go on an all-out assault on Joe Biden. The warnings about Mr. Biden proved prescient. 2 months later, Sanders is all but vanquished in the Democratic presidential race after Biden resurrected his campaign in South Carolina and built an overwhelming coalition of black voters and white moderates on Super Tuesday. While Mr. Sanders has not ended his bid, he has fallen far behind Mr. Biden in the delegate count and has taken to trumpeting his success in the battle of ideas rather than arguing he still has a path to the nomination. I remind you, over 50% of the country has not yet voted. His effort to regain traction has faltered in recent weeks as the coronavirus pandemic has frozen the campaign and perhaps heightened the appeal of Biden's safe and steady image. This is where I go back to what I was saying. Right now, Bernie has a massive opportunity. Biden is missing in action. The media will be forced to start wondering, where is Joe Biden if Bernie Sanders is front and center all over the place? Why he's not doing that, why his campaign is not doing that. It's both good politics and good for the situation. We need leadership right now. Donald Trump isn't offering that leadership. There is a huge vacuum of leadership right now, and Bernie Sanders and his campaign could be filling it. I'm not calling for them to do daily live streams and push people to go to berniesanders.com and leave $10 or leave money. I'm not talking about him fundraising. I'm not talking about him talking about even the campaign. But just leading. Yes, he's done 2 live streams, a couple videos, but I say Bernie Sanders should be doing a daily live stream immediately in response after Donald Trump's press conferences. If Biden isn't going to do it, you have the opportunity to do it. And people are going to start wondering in those other states, shouldn't this be Joe Biden doing this? Bernie, have the national nurses part of your live streams if you could set up the tech. I just don't understand. I know some of you don't like me criticizing Bernie, but, we got to be real here. So, I'm going to read a little bit more of this. In the view of some of Sanders' advisors, the candidate's abrupt decline was a result of unforeseeable and highly unlikely events. Most of all, the sudden withdrawal of 2 major candidates, Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg, who instantly threw their support to Mr. Biden and helped spur rapid coalescing of moderate support behind his campaign. Yeah, the New York Times kind of left out that Barack Obama was behind the whole thing. Mr. Sanders had been on the brink of winning, his pollster said, until the most unprecedented event in the history of presidential primaries occurred. But interviews with more than 36 Sanders aides, elected officials, activists, and other people who worked with his campaign revealed a more extensive picture of his reversal of political fortune. Though Mr. Sanders climbed to a position of seeming dominance by mid-February, he and his inner circle also made a series of fateful decisions that left him ill-positioned to win over skeptical Democrats and sorely vulnerable to an opponent with Mr. Biden's strengths. Sanders proved unable to expand his base well beyond the left or to win over African Americans in meaningful numbers. He failed to heed warnings from traditional party leaders and even from within his campaign about the need to modulate his message and unify Democrats. He allowed internal arguments to fester within his campaign, an ungainly operation that fragmented into factions beneath the only 2 real decision makers, Sanders and his wife. Though outwardly amiable, Sanders' inner circle fractured between some long-serving counselors and relative newcomers, like Fez Shakir, his campaign manager. Mr. Shakir and others regarded pleas from Mr. Tolchin and other pugilistic aides, David Sirota, to go on the attack against Mr. Biden as both futile and annoyingly predictable. while Mr. Shakir's internal critics saw him as exceedingly territorial. So I'm not going to read the rest because a lot of it is just kind of, Bernie not going on the offense, squabbling between the campaign. But to me, there is two major reasons. There's two major reasons that Bernie Sanders is probably not going to win the Democratic nomination. I hate to burst your bubble. I'd love to, toy with you and give you false hope, but I'm not going to do that. He's probably not going to win the nomination. It actually wouldn't surprise me if he suspends his campaign soon. To me, the number one reason Bernie Sanders is not going to win has nothing to do with anything that was put in that article. The New York Times briefly touched on it in that article, but this is the real thing here. Mr. Biden's, after his South Carolina victory, Mr. Biden's incredible 72 hours between his victory in South Carolina and the first poll closings on Super Tuesday exerted a kind of gravitational pull rarely seen in politics. 3 opponents dropped out, Pete, Amy, and Tom Steyer, and then 3 rivals endorsed him in a dramatic fashion on Monday in Dallas, Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Beto O'Rourke. Political operatives marveled at the thoroughness and spread of his consolidation of support. Kevin Cattay, a former advisor to Tom Steyer, noted that the cumulative value of Mr. Biden's final 3 days of almost pure positive media coverage, that's an understatement. I would just say a giant super PAC in 3 days. Biden got a staggering amount of $72 million of essentially free advertising across the media. We're talking CNN, MSNBC, all the print outlets. $72 million in 3 days. Adding to that, add local media in those markets, and it easily tops $100 million worth of earned media in 72 hours. And this guy, Kevin Cattay, is an advertising professional. Voters in those Super Tuesday states made their decisions. A lot of them, I think in some states it was 40 to 50% of voters decided in the final days before the campaign, before those Super Tuesday states, and you have over $100 million, according to advertising executives, in essentially a propaganda campaign. Does that possibly influence voters to think, oh yeah, Biden's the most electable now? Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.